Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. My presentation is going to be Going Virtual, Pro-Social Archaeology at Historic Brattonsville during the COVID-19 pandemic with Dr. Rick Chacon, also of Winthrop University in Rock Hill. I'd like to start by thanking our organizers and also the other presenters today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and I'm looking forward to this virtual program of the Archaeological Society of South Carolina. Our pro-social focus is being driven really by two primary problems, and that is public awareness of slavery in the U.S. and elsewhere, for that matter, is really rather limited, with the enslaved being viewed as simply non-skilled servants and laborers, which really couldn't be further from the truth. That is that they're viewed as these kind of mono-skilled workers that only do, one or two tasks to get things done around a plantation. When in reality, the enslaved during the historic period in the U.S. were actually very complicated and complex laborers. They were innovators, and they were problem solvers, which led to much of the prosperity of the plantations which they served. So much of the wealth of the slave owners and the elites of society was built by their own efforts. Likewise, traditional interpretations of freed slaves after the end of the Civil War, from slavery to sharecropper during that postbellum period, is also really fundamentally flawed. Many of the skilled slaves continued their side trades when they became freed. Many of those became landowners, independent farmers, or particularly in the cities, full-time tradesmen, where their skills were in very high demand. And our goals are really to gain a better understanding of the contributions of the enslaved at Historic Brattonsville and elsewhere, and also to encourage a greater acceptance, pride, and participation by African American descendants in the local community and elsewhere. And what we've learned from the active descendants is that they have a hard time opening this narrative about their ancestry and about slavery within their own communities. So we're trying to help through public outreach and other activities to get rid of the kind of negative view, even within their own community, of their own history. And also we want to use our gained knowledge to promote awareness of African American heritage, in innovation and agency within and beyond South Carolina. So really it's, kind of the bigger picture that we're after, both within and beyond the local community. And our methods are likewise diverse. We conduct archaeological fieldwork on occasion with students from the university. We do living histories and documentary research, although much of what we depend on has been done by the descendants of the enslaved themselves. And we've learned an awful lot by developing relationships and friendships with several individuals that you'll be introduced with during this presentation. And we want to focus on those enslaved households and lifeways instead of those of the plantation owners or the elite, which is your more typical focus, historically speaking. We also want to collaborate with the descendants, as I mentioned just now. Descendants of the enslaved that are currently engaged in public outreach through the formation of the Brattonsville African American Descendants project or program. And also, we want to interact with other plantations that are focused on this advanced narrative of African American history, particularly places such as Montpelier and Highlands in Virginia, which we've already had some interactions and we'll highlight later. And as a result of COVID-19, as we'll be talking about in depth, using virtual programs such as Zoom, which is what I'm recording this in, to build, maintain relationships and to share information, both during the pandemic and afterwards. And what we hope to convince you of is that really from slavery empowerment is a diverse and ongoing story of cultural complexity and agency within the African American community that really needs to be recognized, promoted, and a source of pride within those descendant populations. Also, pro-social and public archaeology provides a means to engage both descendants and the general public. And this could only lead to more enlightened racial discourse and understanding. And I think we'd all agree that this day and age that's needed more of. And also, we hope to convince you that virtual efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic to make and maintain both social relationships and research collaborations will lead us to some really meaningful results currently, as well as ongoing into the future. The Piedmont location of Historic Brattonsville is a little unique. There are other Piedmont plantations, but as most of you know, most of the plantations during the historic period were in the Low Country, due initially to rice and indigo agriculture, and then later cotton and other agricultural production. But the Piedmont location, even though it's a little bit unique in terms of its geography, was nonetheless a brutal existence for the enslaved. And really the wealth of the plantation owners and the plantation system was built by the toil and lives of the enslaved themselves. But one of the things that when I'm talking to descendants is one of the things that really strikes me about the lives of the enslaved is that they found a way not simply to survive, and many did not survive, but despite all of those challenges, they found a way to thrive. They weren't simply survivors. They found a way to thrive, even though all of the odds were really stacked against them in this system. So until recently, particularly only beginning since the late 1990s, the focus prior to the late 90s was really on the Bratton family and elite history, both at Historic Brattonsville and at plantations all over the Southeast. But now there's a growing emphasis on the diverse living history there, going back to the Revolutionary War, all the way through to more recent history, the decline of Historic Brattonsville during the sharecropper years of the early 20th century. And a lot of what we understand about the lives of the enslaved has actually come from slave descendant activism, particularly Mr. Wally Cathcart and Miss Margaret Crawford Parson Willens, who we lovingly call Miss Margaret, and Dr. Lisa Bratton, who is African American history professor at Tuskegee University. And there are several others, but these three individuals in particular have really been, a spearhead for what has gone on out there, and they're a big part of the reason that Rick and I have decided to get more involved out there. One of the annual events, there's really two big events a year. One is by way of the back door, held annually in February, dealing with the lives of the enslaved. And then in the fall, in September, there's an annual event called By the Sweat of Our Brows, both of which focus on the enslaved at Historic Brattonsville and their lives and what their descendants have endured as well. And they're very interesting programs. And I encourage all of you, I'll mention it here in a few minutes, you can go online and experience some of those programs now, but to go in person once COVID has subsided, particularly this fall, I really encourage you to do so. So in the past few years, Rick and I both have been involved as representatives of Winthrop University, Historic Brattonsville, And those activities have also been diverse, dealing everything from discovery of fingerprints and brick mold finger impressions by Rick back in 2016 to fieldwork by myself and students in a fieldwork and anthropology archaeology course in 2017. So we've got more and more involved. And also in late 2019, Rick took some of the Brattonsville descendants on a field trip up to Virginia. And they met with other organized descendants from Montpelier. And that ended up leading to the formation of the Brattonsville African American Descendants Project, which Rick and I are very closely involved. So in February of last year, the By Way of the Back Door program was really the last major event held in person. As you know, by late February, it was beginning to be clear we were going to have a problem in the U.S. with COVID-19, and things began, to go downhill. So it presented us with many challenges, to which going virtual ended up being, the short-term answer. So unfortunately, on March 16th of 2020, Historic Brattonsville was closed to the public, and that continues to this day. And the casualties were many. Plans to return with another Winthrop University field crew in the fall had to be canceled. Another summer excursion that had been planned with Brattonsville descendants to Highlands and Montpelier plantations was also canceled. But, despite all of these challenges, there actually, were some bright moments that came about even as early as last summer. In July of 2020, a Winthrop graduate, Miss Oriana Moore, was hired as Historic Brattonsville African American History interpreter. And I can tell you from the couple of times I've interacted with her in person or virtually, she is really bringing new energy to outreach, and I think, she has so much potential that we're very happy that she has joined Historic Brattonsville and the team of good folks out there. So we're really excited to have her there as the African American History interpreter. Moving into the fall, things started to go really virtually for the first time, and what I meant to add about Ms. Moore is that her activities, of course, with everything closed, have all had to be virtual. But she's dove right in and has done many different virtual programs that you can find at Historic Brattonsville Facebook page and YouTube site. So I encourage you to look those up. She's done a really magnificent job. So beginning in the fall, more virtual programs were being worked out. There's some that were already present, like Time Travel Tuesday, where there are presentations such as this one given. I was invited to give a webisode on the archaeology of the enslaved. Also in September, By the Sweat of Our Brows, which is normally held in person, became a series of virtual programs on Facebook and YouTube. And you see Miss Margaret down here. And then on the right here are some of the programs. And those are still available online, so I encourage you to look them up. They're all excellent programs. Also in September, I finally had enough time to sit down and do a little bit of writing, being stuck here at the house and not traveling doing field work. So I published a short article in the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology's Legacy magazine, which I'm a research affiliate of theirs, and that's at the University of South Carolina. So we published the results of our field work back in 2017. And then on December 16th, one of the more exciting things to happen during the year is we had a virtual kind of meeting of the descendant families from Brattonsville, Highlands, and Montpelier. in which we got to meet everyone, and everybody got to tell a little bit of their story. And I tell you, it was really fascinating and a lot of fun just to get to know people from different plantation systems with different but very similar stories of the lives of their descendants. And then in November, another one of the really big things that happened, Rick and I were involved in the first annual Russian American Research Nexus, or RARN meeting, which was held virtually with Russian colleagues that are at the African Institute, African Studies program in Moscow. And there were international scholars from all over that were talking about African history, U.S. African American history. And so it was really a great program. Some of our Russian colleagues have visited in the past, and we're hoping that there'll be more international interaction, collaboration, and visitations as a result of this ongoing effort. And most recently in February, By Way of the Back Door was also held virtually, and just like the By the Sweat of Our Brows program in the fall, you can find most of these programs online, and they're all really exceptional and worth a closer look. And then this past week on Thursday, March 11th, Brattonsville staff and I all participated in a virtual panel meeting with other research institutions and scholars called Understanding Slavery Through Archaeology, which was hosted by the Grove Museum in Tallahassee, Florida. This isn't a screenshot yet because I'm recording this before the meeting happened on Wednesday. So I just threw that in there for a visual. But I'm really excited about participating in that. So we've met challenges using virtual format, but when will Historic Brattonsville reopen to the public? And I talked to the director, Mr. Gary Tilley, yesterday, and he still isn't aware of when that's going to be yet. They're following very closely the CDC guidelines and making decisions accordingly. So hopefully it will be as soon as more vaccinations have been had, things will begin to reopen there. So in conclusion, Historic Brattonsville, Descendants of the Enslaved, and our own academic efforts to expand both the narrative of the contributions and lives of the enslaved really have continued with vigor throughout this pandemic. And what we're really looking forward to is returning to in-person interactions and collaborations in the year ahead. And those post-COVID directions are just going to be kind of a continuation of what we had established before the pandemic. That's to lead and host descendants and scholars on visits to Brattonsville and other plantations, to collaborate with descendants of the enslaved through the Brattonsville African American Descendants Project, and hopefully, integrate new members within the community that aren't involved currently. To promote the location of the enslaved quarters at Historic Brattonsville in pro-social public outreach and education. And I really hope that they will develop an interpretive trail because it's just kind of a little wooded area and there's not a lot to see. It'd be really nice to have panels with information where you'd walk a trail and you'd learn about the lives of the enslaved as you went along, and the destination would be where the slave quarters were. So that's what I'm hoping will happen in the future. And then we've developed all of these virtual programs. So I hope that will continue after COVID-19, because we think that this form of outreach can reach a greater audience and really highlight the lives of the enslaved and their descendants in a really positive and uplifting way. So thank you all for your attention. Just some quick acknowledgements to so many of the people that have helped us along the way. Thank you all again, and please stay well.